G'day everyone, welcome back to The Kitchen Table here on Freethinkradio.com. My guests at Kitchen Table this week were Ben and Mack from the Out of Left Field podcast, which broadcasts from the lovely, lovely city of Victoria on Vancouver Island in British Columbia. And I guess this will be the fourth episode in the Canucks at the Kitchen Table working title series, and that's a thing I've been trying to put together and kind of loosely conceptualized as recruiting all of the independent Canadian political and cultural online commentators that I can find and who will answer my emails, and just asking them about stuff they do and why they do it. And so far it's actually been a really awesome experience. You can find previous episodes I've done with Josh from Freedom Free for All Victoria, Alex Van Ham from Freebird Media in Toronto, and Mitchell from Kilometer Media, also down there in Southern Ontario, on the Freethinkradio YouTube channel. And I have to say that this chat with Ben and Mack was absolutely no exception. It was a real pleasure to have them on. And you can find Out of Left Field episodes on SoundCloud, on their YouTube channel, and on their website, outofleftfield.ca, because we're Canadian. And I really encourage people to check them out. They've got some really great interviews, a lot of great insights, and I have to say it's all accompanied with a really refreshingly good sense of humor. But before we get into it, I'd like to tell you all to stick around tonight for Time for the Show at 10 o'clock, broadcasting live from the Hypercube Laboratories, and then to check back through the week. We've got Share a Slice Tuesdays at 10. Wednesdays you can find myself and Doc Ellis on the Short Bus podcast, and call into the show, why don't you? And then also check back to the Freethink Radio YouTube for weekly live stream editions where Doc Ellis solves all of the problems of the people of Reddit. And last but absolutely not least, please check out The Pale Horse, which is the Freethink Radio collaborative zine. Yes, a zine in the current year. A real paper published piece of media. And you can find out more about that on our Twitter and on our Facebook page, Freethink Radio, on both of those. And if you want your very own copies of The Pale Horse, along with other materials hand-delivered to you by a professional postmaster, please visit Freethink Radio Patreon page, and you can find out how to have that happen. The next issue is underway as we speak, so keep an eye out in your local bus stops, laundromats, shopping malls, recycling bins, and yeah, maybe you'll find one. Also, if this sounds interesting to you, send us your stuff. We would be happy to put it in print for you. So, all of that said, without further ado, here are Ben and Mack from the Out of Left Field podcast. All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Ben and Mack, for joining me at the kitchen table. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. And I'll let you introduce yourselves properly, but Ben and Mack are hosts on the Out of Left Field podcast, broadcasting from the lovely Vancouver Island in BC. And yeah, that was one of the first things I wanted to ask you guys, just what motivated you to put the podcast together and get out on the YouTubes and the internet?
That's a good question. The short answer is that Mac and I would have many alcohol-fueled late-night political conversations that were just loads of fun, and when, 3 a.m. rolled around and Mac drunkenly stumbled home, that was that, and there was just no record of these great chats. Yeah, into the night. So we figured if we're having these great political conversations anyway, then we might as well make a podcast out of it and have some fun.
Yeah, that's how it started, at least. I mean, it really was just us talking about whatever we wanted to talk about whenever we felt like recording. Really, is all it was. There was no idea of guests or having anyone on or really interviewing people. I mean, we occasionally, the only people we got on were like people who were just our friends who might also want to just do that too. So that's how it started.
Yeah, and it kind of it grew into something, more and more where we kind of eventually kind of got tired of just having just us or just us and a friend just talk about whatever, and like, hey, why don't we actually get some guests on the show, people that actually know what they're talking about, and like people outside of our immediate circle of friends. I guess it was really the NDP leadership race back a couple of years ago.
2 years ago, I think now.
Yeah, that was when we really started to get taking it a little bit more seriously and having some guests on the show to discuss it, because I was personally like pretty involved in that whole process, and I was like really interested in what it was. So we did like 3 or 4 episodes on the whole thing. And then after that, it was like, hey, well, let's keep having more guests on the show and make it a thing.
Yeah.
Yes, some of the episodes I was listening to before I got in touch and you guys came on were with some of your guests, and I really enjoyed them. You've got some good folks on the show. So how long would you say you've been doing it now?
Whoa. Ooh.
That's a good question.
Again,
4 years on and off.
4 years on and off. 2 years probably more seriously. Like in the first 2 years, there was like a couple of like 4-month breaks, and we just sort of stopped doing it for whatever reason. And then,
I know all about that.
Pretty much after, pretty much after the NDP leadership race. And there should have been a few moments, events and interviews we've done since then have sort of built up a sense of that we've like actually going to do something that isn't just us just talking about whatever, but like an actual interview, an actual thing, a current event that we may ourselves even be able to, on occasion, sort of kind of get the inside track on sometimes. Like, interviewing Cory Doctorow was one of those. Like, we've interviewed a few people where it felt like we actually we were like doing something current and not just talking about, I don't know, what were some of our early episodes?
Oh, don't remind me. Jesus. That's stretching way back. We would usually just like pick
anarchism.
Yeah, we did an
episode on anarchism. Just whatever our thoughts were about it at the time, and it wasn't very good. And it's just sort of.
Oh, it sounds like it would have been great, to be honest.
Well, that was a whole different era when we had only one microphone. We were like huddled around it like a tiny bonfire, and we didn't really have much structure. It's like our old episodes are kind of like a totally different and worse podcast than what we do now.
Hopefully, I'd like to think so.
And speaking of guests, by the sounds of it, I think we're probably the first, socialists that have ever been on your podcast, Kitchen Table. So we're happy to be the inaugural lefties. So hello to all of your listeners who aren't maybe accustomed to us, SJWs or whatever.
Yeah, I think. Well, I don't know if you're the first self-described Marxist to have been on Freethinkradio, the greater website, but right. Definitely on this podcast, Kitchen Table, and I thank you very much for that.
Yeah, hey, it's a pleasure.
Yeah. So, what is the response to the podcast been like?
Pretty good. I mean. And I think we'll probably end up talking more and more about this as this interview proceeds, but kind of like everyone and their dog has a podcast now, and like there's pros and cons associated with that. Like, it's great that everybody can have a voice and everyone can express themselves and stuff, but the cons, of course, is that you end up listening to a couple of dipshits like ourselves that don't have journalism degrees and are like literally just a couple guys with microphones. And so there's good and bad, and so, but I guess to answer your question, I think we started out very small. Like, we were stoked when we got like, a few dozen listeners, and that was great. But then, once we started getting more and more, bigger interviews and stuff, we got more positive support, and it feels awesome when you don't have to be the one promoting your episode on Reddit or Twitter or whatever, like
which is against the Reddit terms.
It is against the Reddit terms of service, but when someone else posts your episode and like, oh, I found this sweet podcast, and like, hey, that's me, that's wicked.
Actually, sorry, Ben just had a phone call. But what I will say, and I'll probably get back to finish this story, is we were just camping this last weekend, We went
Nice.
camping and happened to sort of, we were sitting around a bonfire at the campsite and happened to just come across a couple other people. And Ben, in his usual fashion, decided to, broach the topic of like, hey, do you listen to podcasts? And also, hey, do you happen to listen to this podcast? Out of left field?
Totally nonchalantly.
And it was like, yeah, I've heard of them. And I was like, that feels really weird that anywhere, like, that there would ever even be, I mean, it makes sense. He's from Vancouver. The guy was from Vancouver. He's about our age. He's,
Yeah.
whatever. I mean, it's not like it's out of the blue that he would have heard of this podcast, but it's just a weird feeling that, like, there are people, it still feels weird that there are people I don't know who have listened to my voice. Like, just that idea
Hundreds of
just
them.
seems strange to me.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's a hard thing to conceptualize. And, I mean, I'm stoked just when strangers comment on videos,
Oh yeah,
So-
definitely. I even love the angry comments. I mean, like, if something you've said has incised someone so much that they feel the need to angrily comment on your post, that's fucking awesome. Like, that means that you're saying something meaningful.
Yeah. We did
Absolutely.
an episode on the DSA in America, and like it was me, Ben, and a fellow by the name of Doc, and we all had very different views on what like the DSA was and where it could go, and like socialism in America and all that. And I thought it was really funny that the response we got, like, there were a lot of people angry with the episode, and they were all disagreeing with each other about why we were all wrong. And it was like, people were like, the DSA is terrible, or the DSA is not nearly as bad as you say it is, or the DSA doesn't matter. It was just, and that, I think, is, if anything, that's the kind of thing that, to me, is a good sign that, you've done a good, and that been an actual debate, and actual, ideas have been thrown around.
Definitely. You've actually started a conversation, which is, I think, probably one of the optimal results. You'd rather see that going on than the echo chamber anyway.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, echo chamber is probably my biggest concern, I guess, with sort of podcasts, because it is
Right.
There's a lot of them, and it's really easy to just listen to the ones you agree with and no one else, and not for nothing, but the people who you agree with generally seem to be making good arguments, and they seem to be smart people, so you want to listen to them more, and it kind of feeds back into itself. And on the other hand, listening to people you really disagree with is like exhausting and takes work, whereas a nice podcast you can put on when you're working, or making dinner or whatever.
driving or
You don't need to
something.
like get furious about something you're listening to while you're trying to relax. So I do think echo chamber is a major problem in sort of the, I guess, I don't know what you call it, new media podcasting world. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely easy to get sucked into that kind of rabbit hole. But like you were saying, with just the sheer volume and like proliferation of media out there, that's something I think that's kind of maybe an interesting thing to look at too. We could talk about a bit. And it kind of ties into one of the other things I wanted to ask you guys about, which is this kind of blurring of the lines between media versus entertainment versus commentary versus journalist and guy in a basement with a microphone. And
Us.
yeah, or me. I'm not in a basement, but I'm just like a lady with a microphone and a laptop. So
Yeah, the internet connection and yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that, like, mainstream media, mainstream newspapers are kind of hemorrhaging money.
yeah,
Mainstream news outlets, people are increasingly kind of skeptical towards. And you also, at the same time, the internet is, in a sense, democratizing access to being able to share your opinions. And in fact, it kind of reminds me of back in the early 2000s when blogs were starting to become a thing. Like everyone had a MySpace and whatever the fuck. And, I was first deeply cynical towards this kind of progression into, anybody can post, because It's like, these people don't have journalism degrees. Like, why would I trust their opinions? And, you know, like 15 years later, here I am with my own podcast, and I don't have a journalism degree, so why would anyone trust my opinions? But as it turns out that, like, I think that even if you don't have a journalism degree, you still can have something to offer. Your opinions can still be valid. And sometimes people, just, you know, everyday, regular people, can have great insights too, that, you know, maybe mainstream media outlets wouldn't necessarily say themselves. So yeah. I think it's a mixed bag.
I think people feel like there's a big deficit, you could say, maybe in the mainstream media, where you're really only getting like very binary kind of opinions. You're not getting a lot of the variations that you might be able to find in different online independent commentators. And there's a lot of cynicism, too, I think, because of it's become like competing narratives between alternative versus establishment kind of medias.
Yeah.
Well, even, I mean, I think that even when you're talking about, like mainstream media, for example, even what is generally touted as a pretty progressive media institution, the Washington Post, is owned by Jeff fucking Bezos, who's the richest man in the history of the world, and as it turns out, like, coincidentally, the Washington Post has run numerous articles on why raising the minimum wage is a bad idea. Because that means Mr. Bezos can't treat his warehouse workers like his personal fucking fiefdom, you know, cattle ranch. So even in within the mainstream media, in organizations that are generally considered left-wing, there's all sorts of other stuff going on. So it's almost like with these independent commentators, as you know, generally speaking, probably not in all cases, but for the most part, they don't necessarily have any like hidden agenda. That like not as many economic interests at play. You know, another example, MSNBC, famously, you know, left-wing media channel, is owned by fucking Comcast, a horrible corporation that is one of the most unpopular and universally reviled companies in the United States of America.
Yeah, just sort of to sort of take a bit of a different direction with your question there. I do think that like we like blogs, podcasts, alternative media, independent media, whatever, however you want to sort of phrase it, whatever thing, it is filling in the space that is kind of being evacuated by the, I guess, mainstream media, or, you know, corporate media or established media, or just, let's face it, like way more popular media, in that, like, journalism, like the actual like gumshoe journalism of going and finding records and doing research and reporting and, you know, investigating stuff, is really expensive. And that's, I think, the real failure that's happening in the mainstream media, that investigation is not really taking place. That, you know, the average journalist in a large corporation is pretty much doing what I'm doing, which is reading a statement by the government and then commenting on it. You know, like, a press release from the prime minister has been put out, and, you know, I have an opinion on it and he has an opinion on it, but he's, you know, an employee. This journalist is an employee of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You'd think they'd be able to put a little bit more time and effort into, like, you know, is it true? Is what they're promising possible? What is actually happening? And for me, I can fill in the gap and be a lot more sort of flamboyant about my opinions about the statements the government puts out. But I think the real failure that isn't being replaced is that investigative aspect, the ability to spend the time and, let's face it, a lot of money on finding out what the truth is in the world. That just is, it is, at the end of the day, a cash game. Like, you need some source of income, whether that is advertisers paying, you know, a news channel money to pay for journalists to do all that. The idea that, like, I think it's a good one. The idea that, like, journalism is this bedrock principle that we have to have, like, you know, like freedom of speech, freedom of press, journalists being able to do their job and educated citizenry, all of that sort of stuff is true, and yet the industry that we rely on to do that for us is entirely about making profits, not about actually informing anyone. And that is sort of that problem is accelerating, so that the investigative aspect of that industry is being sort of destroyed in favor of pretty much what we do, which is just sort of commenting on the news. Like, you get four talking heads, and that's CNN. we can do that.
I think you make a really valid point there, and I think a lot of people... Oh, I hear a bit of a feedback. But anyway, sorry. I think a lot of people realize that as well, and I think that kind of feeds more into this growing cynicism with the mainstream media, basically.
Yeah.
Well, even it's not. I mean, just sort of to call back to what you said there, Mac, about it being about making money rather than just informing the public. We also have publicly owned media, like in Canada, CBC or the BBC in Britain, but they are themselves experiencing massive funding shortages and cuts, and having to replace the money that they previously got from the government with paid advertising and sponsorships and so on and so on. And so it seems that not even publicly owned, publicly funded media is safe from this kind of trajectory towards more anemic resources allocated to journalism. That being said, I just want to give a very quick shout out to the Tyee, because we've had a couple of people from the Tyee on in Brian C. I can't remember his last name, but we did an episode with him about Facebook surveillance, and he was actually doing some really impressive journalism with like a Freedom of Information Act request, and like sifting through the documents he got from the government.
Yeah,
that kind of journalism is still alive. But it seems with the financial pressures is exceedingly more difficult to do.
And yeah, if you want to do it, you pretty much have to just sort of like go, well, I guess this, like, I will be monk-like. I'm not going to have it. This isn't a career. This is sort of like a thing I feel a need to do kind of morally. It's never going to be possible for this to be my life.
Yeah, it has to be a real labor of love.
Very much so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, speaking of, I guess, you guys must be in it. I mean, I guess, judging from how you started off and everything, is basically just that disease of politics that some of us end up with, and it becomes a kind of labor of love-hate.
Disease of politics. I like that.
Yeah. Well, sometimes, you wonder. But anyway, so let's just get right into it. I guess maybe it's a little bit of the elephant in the room, because everyone is always talking about how online podcasts and YouTubers and online political channels are a cesspool of alt-right extremism, and it's basically the breeding ground for right-wing voices. So do you guys feel like an island, like a little island lost in a sea of insanity on the internet
in the Pacific Ocean? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I probably would have said yes like 2 or 3 years ago.
Right.
Probably, but it seems that there's been a real sort of shift in the last couple of years that, yeah, all the right-wing stuff is all still there. Like, whatever you might be talking about, it's all like still online. But if anything, it hasn't really changed or done anything. And there seems to have been, in the last few years, something of a, an expansion of left-wing, I guess, just stuff online, quality content, whether we're talking about, like, YouTube content creators through, like, what's referred to on the left as BreadTube, which is sort of just this idea that, like, what if you had YouTube, but it was like well-produced content and left-wing? And then, of course, there's that new channel that's going to be starting? Means TV is also is just started now.
Okay.
That's a sort of I think it's like supposed to be a socialist version of Netflix, basically.
Yeah, I think Chapo had them on recently.
Yeah, and then of course there's Chapo Trap House, which are quite popular. It's hard to tell because again, it is very much an echo chamber kind of problem. Like, how big is the right wing? For me, is sort of like, well, I don't know. I haven't heard any podcasts that I liked, and I don't mean like as in agreed with. I mean just found engaging or like even well produced right wing podcasts. They tend to just be sort of on like YouTube is popular for right wingers certainly, but it tends to be stuff more like PragerU videos, which I wouldn't really count as alternative media simply because they're just sort of a fairly well-funded thing that's just
pretty high production,
putting out videos, and whether or not people are watching them, it's kind of hard to know or care.
Yeah, I want to follow up with what you said, Mac, in that it does seem very much. I mean, it's obviously an echo chamber, like the social media platforms and other platforms that this media is being shared on are designed to give you content that you want to see. And so if it's, if they've determined that, like, hey, this guy likes, fucking Ben Shapiro or whatever, then clearly he's going to like all these other right-wing people. I would say in the case of YouTube, it being a complete fucking cesspool of, right-wing videos, the right very much dominates YouTube, and that is slowly starting to change. But I think that there would be a perception, like, if you're a left-wing person, you're, most of the podcasts or blogs or other media that you will just come across as it turns out, also going to be left-wing. So the perception that you're left with is, well, most of the podcasts and blogs are left-wing, whereas someone on the right is going to find all this other right-wing stuff and therefore conclude that, well, the online space is dominated by the right. So I think it's very hard to say what the actual truth is, because we're part of a podcast network with a bunch of other left-wing podcasts, and there's a whole bunch of others, and there's a whole shitload of right-wing podcasts too. So I would say, with the singular exception of YouTube, it's very difficult to conclude, whether or not one side dominates the space or the other.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it's almost if you kind of follow that idea that everyone is kind of locked into their own little echo chambers, it presents a kind of scary hypothesis of people living in these bubbles that aren't really in tune with the reality of the people around them, thinking, everything on the media is left or everything on the media is right, when really you've just kind of been sucked into your little bubble, mirrored bubble almost.
Yeah, welcome to the future, folks.
I think it actually kind of gets even worse than that, because it would be one thing just to say people will just listen to the stuff they like. If you like baseball, you'll listen to baseball podcasts. If you like fixing classic cars, you'll just listen to fixing classic cars podcasts. And in all cases, you'd say there sure are a lot of them. Classic car podcasts just dominate the medium because there's like hundreds of them, and I can't listen to them all. Clearly, it's what's taken over. But the other problem is that, like, especially on Facebook, it seems that there's also a kind of counter sort of position here, because especially when we're talking about left-wing and right-wing politics, we know that even if we don't know there are left-wing podcasts or we know there are right-wing podcasts, we know there is some vague left-wing and right-wing out there, and that still needs to be accounted for. And I think what ends up happening is it's not just an echo chamber where it's like everyone agrees with me, it's also everyone I talk to agrees with me, and there's also those bastards out there somewhere who believe these things that I've been told by the people who have no interest in giving me an honest account. Especially, I would say, I mean, not for nothing, but the fact that I am arguing personally against capitalism, that sort of means that anyone with a lot of money would at some point eventually, like, not describe my positions in good faith. Like, whether that's a CNN or whoever, it doesn't really matter. And on that basis, I'd say it's a bit of a tough one, because, like, what are you going to do if you don't how would I put it? Like, it's difficult to break through that because I think a lot of people have just become kind of entrenched politically. They've heard the socialist argument from people who aren't socialists and have not any interest in explaining what socialism is. So I don't know if there's like a way to break through that if that's all they've ever heard. I don't know.
But what about Venezuela?
Yeah, or whatever.
Well, and I think that's one of the big reasons I really wanted to have someone, who specifically identifies themselves as socialist or left wing on, is because, like you said, it really shuts down a lot of the dialogue and people become very entrenched, and the polarization is definitely noticeably increased. I think, here and south of the border the last 4 years or whatever. So I think, given that Freethinkradio has more of a reputation as like a fringe kind of site and, apolitical, more like with the subgenius stuff. But I thought, with this series, trying to talk to Canadian commentators, it's really important to get people from all over the place, to, break down the echo chamber and the bubble and show that this kind of thing is out there and is possible. And yeah, so it's a bit of a sidetrack, but thank you again for that.
I think it's actually rather important because it's also the major reason why we wanted to be on and why we're really happy to be that you reached out to us.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm like full disclosure, totally honest, at first I was like, is this a trap? Are they trying to set us up? Like they're gonna like trick us into saying something stupid and then edit us in such a way that we sound like assholes. And then I was like,
this is all going in soundbite mode.
Yeah. We are assholes. We are assholes. But no, this has been great so far. I think what you're doing by getting as wide of a net as possible of different kinds of opinions and stuff is a valiant effort. I think that's fucking rad.
Thanks, man.
Hell cool. Yeah.
But so carrying on though, I guess kind of staying on this topic for a little bit with what was definitely a rise of right-wing media, like around the time of the Trump election and everything. And I think your assessment is right, that it's kind of leveled off in some ways, or the fervor around that kind of thing has started to die down or get redirected in some ways. But, I mean, do you see that kind of proliferation, of content as like a legitimate threat to politics and culture more generally? Like, how do you kind of assess that phenomenon?
I mean, if we're talking about like a conveyor belt of right-wing ideas leading to alt-right, leading to sort of violent actions, I do think that does actually exist. Like, that is possible, that an individual, and many of the people who have done violent things have said exactly this, that like they went from the soft drug to like the harder and harder shit later on and then killed people. That has happened, and so I think it's like more than fair to say that is very real and is something that I think the right wing broadly hasn't really been able to honestly address in any way. It's just sort of been like, no, they didn't believe that. They didn't listen to Ben Shapiro before they did an awful thing, or they didn't, listen to Fox News before they did an awful thing. But I do think that like the danger isn't necessarily like there is that fairly small number of people who do that, and then the as far as like the danger of like the ideas or right wing stuff goes, I don't think that's fundamentally changed at all. Like the threat, as far as I'm concerned, of right wing ideas isn't in the I don't know, the way that they're said or whatever, but it's in kind of like the consequences as applied in policy. Like if a right winger says we're going to cut funding to a service that will result in people dying, then that's the problem. That's where I say the problem lies, and that hasn't changed. Like the idea of cutting funding to healthcare hasn't really changed on the right wing at all in Canada, right? Like that's always been an idea leaned on, and that has always been something that would result in people dying. That's not at all different, but I do think the rhetoric has definitely got a lot more, I don't know, colorful, ridiculous,
colorful. Yeah,
silly,
that's a great word.
Racist too, and the problem, I guess, is like that. I don't know where it'll lead. I don't know if it'll actually end up, like, how much certain politicians are like leaning on certain rhetoric, or they don't even really know what they're saying. They're just like, I frequent Facebook and I saw people using this phrase, so I'll just use it too. And then everyone thinks that they're different than they are. I don't know. It's just, I guess the problem I have with sort of identifying the danger of like right-wing politics is that, for me, again, the danger has always been the actual consequence of those politics, not how they're sort of sold, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
The populism stuff, I think, is like kind of right-wing populism. I mean, I don't know if it's that different, really. It's just kind of like, yeah, they're saying what they wanted to do again, but this time in a way that they think will work.
Well, on the other hand, we are recording this interview right on the heels of a right-wing armed militia in Oregon making threats against the legislature there and shutting down democracy because they wanted to stop the climate change legislation from getting passed, which I think is a terrifying new development. So it may seem that we are on the precipice of a new phase in this sort of vitriolic, discourse that we see.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's just hard to tell. I'm not really. I'm just not really sure what, like, how much of it is a grift, I guess I would say. How much of it is just sort of stuff people say, because, and this is something I found when it comes to like far left versus far right people. The far right is like, it's really hard to get them to ever pin down what it is they actually intend, what they want, what they mean when they say things. When they say like if a right-winger says like, I want an ethno-state, like what that means is very unclear when they say, but I don't want to have, I don't want to force anyone out of my country, or I don't want to break the law, or, just these sort of phrases and ideas that are brought up by far right figures who sort of paper over the contradictions by just denying that they even exist, like that. Right. The idea. Anyway.
Sorry. Yeah. I really like what you said though about not always being able to tell if it's a grift. I think it's a great choice of word too, because there is so much that is just basically trolling. I think when you get to the more extreme sides, that's just saying whatever is most inflammatory to kind of get the most reaction, and it's hard to know how much of that is genuine and how much of that is the grift.
Because again, just to sort of be clear here, like, I'm a far left person. My politics are not at all normal. I'm very left wing. And I can honestly just tell you what I want. I want to see an end to capitalism. I want to see the whole economy run democratically by the working class. And that idea of essentially extending to all the peoples of the world. That's it. I can tell you exactly what I think. It's not hard. It's not something I have to like dodge. It's just, now I know plenty of people don't agree with me, and like they would point out all these problems or whatever that they think that I have, but that's what I actually want. Now, the reasons I want that are also, based on like moral values and the idea of equality and democracy and things like that. But I can actually say that. And a lot of people, especially online, and to be honest, I would say I've seen it more on the right than the left, is just like layers and layers of trolling and irony and, just weird statements that don't mean anything, and these kind of just memes, essentially, sort of memes replacing honest like beliefs.
Yeah, it's I think that's a pretty accurate analysis of it, and it's something I've seen more on the extreme right side of social media too. But that ties into an episode you guys did a while back that I really enjoyed, actually, with a guest by the name of Mike Watson about why the left can't meme.
Right.
I think that was the title.
Yeah. Well, can the left learn to meme?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, can the left learn to meme? And I found that interview really fascinating. I recommend everyone should go and check it out. But it kind of brought to mind something else I wanted to get your guys' opinion on. And this isn't my idea. This is something that I've heard kind of accumulate from a few different commentators and people out there. But the idea that the reason that the right has so-called meme magic, and you get this opposing meme, basically, that the left can't meme, is because basically liberal ideas, socially at least, have become the kind of norm. So what's happened is right-wing culture has become more of the underdog in some ways. And feel free to disagree with this analysis, of course, but I'll lay out the premise for you. And anyway, because it's become the kind of underdog in some ways, it's been put in the position where it is the force that will generate culture and memes and comedy. And basically this is based on the idea that it's always the low culture or the minority culture that kind of generates what becomes popular.
Right.
In mainstream for the next cycle.
Yeah. I get that idea, and I do actually agree with that as you just stated it. But one thing I would just like to point out as far as the right's meme ability goes is that, like, I don't know if they've come up with anything since, like, original since Pepe, and that was, like, 3 years ago. Like,
yeah,
like it.
Good point.
Like,
Fair point.
What are the new memes that the right is coming up with? And I know Ben wants to talk about this a lot, too, so I'll just hand it off to him.
Yeah, I mean, I actually, full disclosure, I didn't actually totally agree with Mike Watson about this particular point. He was on our show and whatnot, but I actually think the left meme game is pretty fucking strong. Like, just go to Chapo Trap House or dare you forbid Chapo Trap House 2, and they got plenty of great memes. And I think that the perception, just the general perception that the right wing is dominating the online space or dominating podcasts or blogs, memes, fucking whatever, very much has to do just with, like, material conditions of capitalism and the internet. Because the fact of the matter is that, even though on one hand the internet has democratized the ability for people to voice their opinions and whatnot, it still is the case that the internet is largely owned and operated by private companies. You still need some sort of funding to do any sort of journalism or whatever. And I think that, as we mentioned earlier, PragerU is a fucking perfect example of this, where the Koch brothers can just throw a couple, like, $1 million at these advertising campaigns, and you see all of these right-wing PragerU advertisements and videos online.
And then they pop up in your feed.
Yeah, and therefore, the discourse is being dominated by right-wing voices, is because right-wing voices tend to be the most well-funded, because right-wing voices are defending capital, and they're defending capitalism and profit-making and private ownership of wealth, and as it turns out, those private owners of
have a lot of wealth
to spend on things like PragerU videos. I think that I think if you're just looking at, like, the on the ground, posting wars, frontline trenches, I would actually say the left has a pretty fucking strong meme game in comparison.
Yeah. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that, like, if we're talking about, like, the right wing versus some kind of, like, bland liberal centrist something or other, then yeah, that, like, the sort of the centrist world of, like, the establishment, the everything is fine, go about your day, the world is okay, don't worry about anything. That world is really bad at making memes. Absolutely the worst, without question. And even though I would say they represent a very tiny minority of people, like people's actual opinions, they do have like a certain level of like we sort of judge ourselves on the basis of them simply because it is, at the end of the day, they're the establishment, they're the people, it's how things have always been done, et cetera, et cetera. But at the same time, I mean, the simplest argument I have against the idea that like the right wing is somehow fundamentally or inherently better at memes is just pointing out that like throughout pretty much all of modern history, it has been left-wingers and liberals who have produced art. It's generally speaking been the right-wingers who want to like cut funding to art programs or dislike, offensive paintings or works of literature or whatever.
Yeah.
And that I don't think really, I don't think you can make sense of the idea that like the right wing has some kind of fundamental like ability to meme when their whole history has been let's just do conservatism basically. It's the conservative vision of like the world was good sometime in the past and we should just do that again forever. That idea is just fundamentally opposed to any meme art culture, like the idea of creating stuff.
Exactly. And that's partly why I felt personally anyway, and I mean, I'm not maybe the most in touch or hip cat out there, but like I've been transported into upside down world sometimes because, like you said, it's always been a more traditional right-wing stance to censor, kind of avant-garde art or culture, and now it seems like it's not the right-wing's place to call for censorship anymore. And you're seeing more censorship come out of like left-wing authorities. So that to me has been very bizarre. And I've been trying to work out how that ties into maybe shifts in authority and the idea that, culture always comes from the underdog. And maybe if the left has shot itself in the foot socially in some ways, by not recognizing that authority would set up that kind of paradigm. But yeah, I'm sorry, that's a bit of a incoherent rant, I know, no. But if you guys could pick up any threads from that.
I think it's a fair point, and it is sort of a major issue sort of hanging over all of this is the idea of like, censorship at universities or whatever, usually universities, right? But the idea of like, some offensive right-winger wants to do a speech at a university and a bunch of university students protest against it and try to stop that speech from happening, and then more right-wingers come and say those left-wingers are anti-free speech, and then
chaos ensues.
The day turns over and it happens again.
Breaks out on all sides.
Yeah, and then what the hell's going on, right? I mean, I'll just say personally, and we do have an episode on free speech that we talked with Lee Phillips about. I personally am not in favor of appealing to like authority figures to stop, racist, bigoted people from giving a speech at universities. I don't think like the school administration is where you should be going to try to defend your rights at a university, whether that right is to be like in a safe space, quote unquote, or free speech, either one. I think that like to the only effective way we have ever been able to fight for our rights, whatever they are, whatever we're trying to make them to be, has been like on the basis of our own power. And quite often, and this is sort of where I would make a distinction for the left-wingers on campuses who appeal to the administration, who appeal to the police to, please stop these people, versus the left-wingers who are just like, we're just going to be really angry and mad and literally tell them to, F off.
To get fucked.
Yeah. Just go away. We don't want you here. You're not welcome. Fuck off. They just generally go away.
Yeah, I think there's an important distinction to, like, I think that one thing that right-wingers have done, particularly folks like, Jordan Peterson, Ben Shapiro, what they've done a really good job of in the last period is characterizing these campus protesters, getting angry about such and such allowed to speak on my campus, and characterizing them as the quintessential representatives of the left wing. which I don't think they are. In fact, I think your average, campus protester who is angry about such and such is really, I would actually classify them mostly as liberals. If you're appealing to the police or the campus authorities to
like some bylaw,
to do their work for you, like shut this down, I don't like these ideas, I don't want to hear them, they're offensive to me. That's not really, the true left-wing stance is like, don't bother with trying to deplatform people, prove them wrong, present ideas that are better. If you can, I think that this reliance on deplatforming is a dangerous precedent to set because, pardon me, the authorities are going to censor left-wing groups as soon as it's convenient to them.
And they have, and they do.
They have, and they will, and they will again.
And that's what happens.
It's ongoing. It's ongoing. It's like the social media platforms now, the net that they are casting is so wide that, left wing, center, neutral, all of it.
Yeah, no, I think it's it's a pointless road to go down because unless you address the actual structures of power in society, what you're going to end up with at the end of the day is like, well, okay, so let's say Facebook. We're going to get rid of everything offensive on Facebook. And what you're going to end up with is just whatever conforms to like Jeff Bezos
or Mark
Zuckerberg or the people who or like the Pringles Corporation, like whatever people who have money and power want people to say. So it won't just be like you can't use a racist slur. It'll be you can't say that I think Pringles sucks. Their chips are terrible and they taste like dough. That'll be not allowed. I think that is the end result of a world in which we sort of abandon the kind of, I would say, class questions of how society functions and end up with this kind of, almost an administrative understanding of how the world works. Like what the problem isn't conflicting material interests. The problem is, we didn't fill out the right form to stop these people from being able to give a speech. And we need to do that instead. We need to stop them like administratively, essentially. It's just bureaucratic is all it is.
They're liberals. They're liberals,
well, Yeah.
And in fact, the only way to win against someone that you disagree with is to present better ideas. And in fact, we saw this with I think one of the most recent people you had on was the anti-Soji guy. What's his name? The conspiracy theorist from Victoria.
I don't know. There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago I had Josh from the Freedom Free For All channel in Victoria on.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there was actually an anti-Soji protest here in Victoria a few weeks back.
A couple of them, yeah.
Yeah, and like the counter protesters were like orders of magnitude larger than the actual anti-Soji protests. So I would say that's a win for the left. If you can bring out more people, if you can bring out show in numbers and show that hey, actually our position is more popular.
That you pick that's
a win.
If you pick a particularly conservative neighborhood like Oak Bay, and still more people in favor of Soji come out, then I would say, broadly speaking, the shift is in favor of Soji, and that shows, to the extent that it matters, that that's what people want.
That's way more powerful than just saying,
event canceled, everyone go home.
Happen.
Yeah. Well, that says nothing.
It doesn't say, because everyone comes out of that saying either, an undue sense of satisfaction, thinking that they've won a victory, or an undue sense of like, we would have won, we were right, we could have gotten people on our side, when that probably wasn't going to happen. And that's, I think that it's not the end of the world for any one of these events to be canceled or for whatever reason, but like the trend has to be more towards mobilizing and engaging people with ideas that they actually care about, not just telling them the people you hate are no longer here and go about your daily business.
Yeah, and everything's fine, just carry on.
Yeah, that's that to me is the sort of hallmark of like a centrist political view, is the everything is fine. You know, go to class, go to work, whatever it is you're doing, just don't
pay your bills.
Yeah, pay your bills. That's fine. And that the world isn't fine. And I do think that that's at its core the material reason that's causing more and more extremist politics. Why more Americans identify as socialists today isn't because of like a crazy socialist conspiracy on our part or anyone else's. It's because they really don't see their lives like improving under the current state of affairs. And
right.
that I think is what in both left wing and right wing too. Like you can go to the right for the same reason. Essentially, there will be a sort of splitting of politics.
Well, sure. Even Tucker Carlson on his program was, with with companies like, Nike giving Colin Kaepernick a sponsorship, and like Gillette being all, gender sensitive and whatever, and telling men to stop being such like ignorant pig fuckers, that like Tucker Carlson sees this and says, well, you know what? Maybe capitalism isn't the best system after all. Maybe these big corporations kowtowing to the SJWs proves that maybe this system isn't so good after all. That rang fucking alarm bells in my mind, where a Fox News contributor is like expressing doubt in capitalism. That's a bad sign. That's a really bad sign.
Yeah.
Or is it a good sign?
Well, yes, it's a good sign in the sense that there's like, people interested in these ideas, but the problem...
No, but I mean that he will start advocating for fascism instead.
Well, probably. It would. I doubt he would. I doubt Tucker Carlson is going to come out of that being like, and that's why we need, workers' co-ops and socialism. And we should expropriate Bezos.
No, it's more that we need to crush the unions.
Because that's the alternative. If you see... if you see Gillette commercials as some form of degeneracy, the solution is, I don't know, a strong man to just force companies not to do that.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is one way or another some kind of fascism.
Yeah, it's definitely seems to have that effect of just driving the wedge further. But I mean, to me, it's like advertising has always been degenerate and pandering and all kinds of, So
it's manipulative. I mean, there's nothing like I've got nothing good to say as far as like advertising as a concept. If you want to like get down to like the advertising 101 in your college course of like, telling people about your products is a good idea. It's like, yeah, sure, fine, but we're well beyond that world now.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, just thinking about the kind of outrage that Gillette thing sparked for the right, it was so, and I find that with so much of the outrage you see on all kinds of issues, it's so, it seems so phony in some ways, because it's like these issues have been with us for decades now, and corporations and the nature of big advertising and how exploitive it can be hasn't really changed.
Yeah, I mean, from a left-wing standpoint, the idea that LGBT, values or recognition is sort of just like corporations feel it's an obligation to sort of represent that in their commercials, just because they're like, well, this is a constituency who might buy our razors or soup or whatever.
Exactly.
Fair enough. I mean that's decent as far as like that is the facts. Like gay people do exist and they do buy razors.
And they need to buy things.
Yeah. Like that is the world we actually live in, and I think it's at least broadly more realistic. But there is something to be said for it always being kind of couched in the language of like, and isn't this corporation noble and good? Had like morally upstanding because it said these things. And you can do it with right wing stuff too. You can do a commercial that is just, all about traditional values and like, the normal hetero whatever marriage and, two white people marrying and having 2.5 children and having a barbecue. You can sell, cans of soup or whipped cream or whatever the hell it is, doing that as well. And it is no more indicative of the values of that corporation. Their interests are money.
Yeah.
They want money. And I think it's a problem on the left, and it's definitely a problem on the right, I think, as well. It's just this idea that, like, looking to businesses or authority figures for, like, cultural cues to tell us whether they're good or bad or not, and who should I support or not? Which businesses should I go to? Is McDonald's, pro whatever or not? Do they believe in the traditional marriage or not? Like, that means anything to a soulless corporation who's, like, turns human lives into capital, and that's it. That's their whole purpose. They just it's a gigantic, like, meat grinder.
No pun intended.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
It's a weird one, but so how do you guys see October shaping up? And I guess 2020, as far as online presences go, but also, kind of in the real world.
Well, do you mean the election?
You mean like Canada and America?
The federal election in Canada, and then the Trump 2020 campaign, which seems to have already started because the Americans can't wait.
I don't think it ever stopped. I think we've hit the point where it was like, Christmas year round. It's just we just hit that sweet spot where, yes, everyone is always campaigning always.
Well, it seems that the American elections last for a completely insufferable 2 years. Once you hit the halfway mark, then the speculation starts. In terms of which I absolutely despise, I've been purposefully distancing myself from American election media because I know that by the time the actual election comes around, I'm going to be so demoralized, tired, and fatigued by all of this bullshit that I just want it to be over, just like happened last time. So I will refrain from commenting on that, Mac. Maybe you will want to, but in terms of the Canadian context in this year, this October, personally, I think, the polls are increasingly bullshit, but I think that Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are increasingly showing themselves as being hypocrites and weak and ineffective and not unprincipled, and so on and so on.
Whatever way you want to take that, too. Like, whether you're a left-winger or a right-winger, it's like, no jobs and no, meaningful improvement to the environment.
Yeah.
We've ended up with both. The worst.
The worst of both worlds.
Yeah, I think it's probably likely at this point. Obviously, a lot can change. Conservatives will probably win the next election. I think the NDP has a lot of good ideas and good aspects to them, but I as they are right now, I don't think that they can offer a substantive alternative. They're a little wishy-washy on. Now that's changing. They've released a Green New Deal, affordable housing strategy, and some other good ideas. So maybe the tide is changing. But historically, the NDP has not really been able to offer a substantive actual alternative. People trust the Conservatives enough to vote them into office. And we also have a really super crappy first past the post electoral system, which basically empowers existing large political parties like Liberals and Conservatives. So I am overwhelmingly pessimistic about this October.
I think it'll probably just be a liberal minority, to be honest, and then just chaos after that. Like, who knows? Like, it might just be like last time when the Liberals got a minority, where it just things went nutty for like a year, and then
there was another election.
And the Conservatives basically took it. But I don't know. On the one hand, it's like, I think the NDP has been putting out a lot of really good stuff lately, but it's difficult for me to say, like, how much anyone will believe it. Like, it's hard to, like, policy-wise, it's all really good, but you, like, just sort of throw out this massive document, and it's like, okay, cool beans, why didn't you say this a year ago, or whatever, like, why now? Obviously, because you want to win an election. So do I really believe you? And can you really win? So it just sort of, there's kind of, I think the NDP sort of deflated by its own indecisiveness in this election. And as far as like the Liberals go, I think they'll be happy to hold on to power. The Conservatives, I don't know what they even want really. I mean, what's his name?
Scheer.
Andrew Scheer is just like a cold bowl of mashed potatoes. He's just unpleasant. Like just nothing. I don't know. It doesn't. I haven't heard anything from them that's like really interesting or good or bad. I mean, a lot of people have been sort of, I think, comparing him to Trump, and that's unfair.
That is very unfair.
Both to Trump and Scheer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Scheer is not nearly as interesting or charismatic as Trump, and Trump is not nearly as like bog standard, boring, and just, I don't know. It's like just a suit. He's just like Scheer is just a suit to me. I just see him talking, and I'm like, who's that guy? And I've said that to myself like a half dozen times, seeing him on TV. Who is that? And it's just, oh, that's Scheer. Who's Scheer? Leader of the Conservatives. Right, of course, that dork.
Well, just to follow up on something you were saying before about the NDP and the Liberals. I think it seems to be common practice that the Liberals will sort of cherry pick their favorite aspects of the NDP platform, adopt it as their own, and then either campaign on it and then either not do it once they're in power or sort of half-ass it. We've seen this already this year with there was a proposed ban on unnecessary single-use plastics that the NDP put forward as part of their Green New Deal, and the Liberals have already adopted that as basically policy. I think, I think personally what the NDP needs to do is to take a platform that is so left-wing that the Liberals would find unconscionable and campaign on that. Ideas and policies that would really, truly transform people's lives and transform the economy to something that is very different that we have now. Because the Liberals will always signal left and then turn right every single fucking election. And the fact that the NDP hasn't caught wind of that yet is very depressing to me. And I think that really the only solution for them is to tack so far left that the Liberals wouldn't dare follow them that way.
Pick something that they wouldn't do, yeah. Like nationalize the oil industry.
Yeah, or nationalize the property rental companies.
Telecommunications. Everybody hates their cable company.
Yeah, that's a great start.
And they do absolutely collude together for pricing.
Yes.
Well, I mean, the telecommunications industry in Canada is a literal dictionary definition of the term oligopoly. Rogers, Bell, Telus, Shaw, they are all in bed together, and you're right. Every Canadian hates their provider, and
what votes would you be losing by saying we're going to screw over those guys?
Yeah, exactly.
But as far as the American election goes, I'm kind of in agreement with Ben here. I don't really want to talk about it until maybe another year from now. But it's been interesting.
I know, it's just exhausting.
It is.
But on the other hand, it's like
I hate it already.
It is happening, so I feel like I should say something. Donald Trump's going to run, and he's going to run against another candidate. Broadly speaking. I don't even think it really matters. I think he'll lose.
I think he'll win.
I think he'll lose against anyone. Well, I'll put it like this. I think he'll lose because he barely won the first time. All it would take for the Democrats to win the election is for the Democratic Party to put their resources where they actually need to put them. Because I don't think Donald Trump is as popular today as he was in 2016. So the odds are, in my head at least, I don't even think it matters who the Democrats put up. They'll probably win. And I think the lesson they'll learn, depending on the candidate, will be just out of this world. If say Biden, the Obama vice president is their candidate, no lesson will be learned. It'll just be Donald Trump was 4 years of craziness, and then everything went back to normal. And then we're fine. And then they'll probably vote Biden in for 2 terms, and then, I don't know.
And they'll keep drone striking civilians.
Yeah, they'll drone strike civilians,
Yeah.
and then like like McAfee will be president after that.
I disagree. I think that if the Democrats put anybody other than Bernie Sanders forward for their nominee, I think they will lose.
See, I disagree there. I think Bernie Sanders is the only one who could lose.
Oh, damn it. Look what you've gotten us into. Here we are.
No. Not because he's a bad candidate. He's an excellent candidate, but because I think the Democratic Party establishment, the centrists of America, would run a third party candidate against him.
Yeah, but you're just spitballing.
I'm not spitballing. This is like an actual legitimate concern, and plenty of, believable candidates have promised to do so. If Joe Biden runs against him as a third-party candidate, he could...
Well, he's going to have some stiff competition from Howard Schultz from Starbucks.
Well, Howard Schultz, yeah, sure, but how much of that is going to, bleed votes away from the Democrats? Is that going to... That would probably, if it works out, be enough to, win Trump the next election. The only thing that is interesting, and the only, a major reason why I actually want to see Bernie Sanders run as president is because his politics and his values and what he believes in sort of cut across the usual liberal conservative divide in America.
What, you mean like having health care?
Yeah, but like his well, sure, but like the red state blue state stuff doesn't really work with him.
Yeah.
Like you can find people who really like him in deep red states.
Yeah, and if the Democratic Party establishment could remove their heads from their own asses for like 5 fucking seconds, they would realize that.
Well, they don't want a socialist, even in name, being president of the United States. I think that is more important to the Democrats than anything else. They would rather lose
to Trump
than have a Democrat.
Yeah.
Socialist.
Moral of the story: liberals hate socialists more than they hate fascists.
Yeah, which is kind of, calling back to a lot of what we talked about. I do think that like the centrists tend to target the left more than they target the right. Now, I'm a leftist, so of course I would say that, and I'm sure a right-winger would be like, the establishment hates right-wingers. But I actually have a reason for saying that, and that's that the right wing tends to defend, established norms, conservative traditional values, capitalism, which is what we're living under, and the left wing tends to be a bunch of crazy weirdos who have a bunch of crazy ideas, and that puts them outside of inherently like established systems of power. And I think that really is the main distinction between like what the left experiences both online and in the real world, and what the right experiences. That like as a leftist, my values, my position, my political beliefs are incompatible with the very system I live in. That is a problem if I'm trying to connect with people in like a natural and easy way.
Hear, hear.
And I think the right wing is, has an easy time of it.
Well, that was a very long-winded answer to your very straightforward question. Sorry about that.
No, not at all. That was great. That was excellent. I think, with Bernie in 2016, I am confident he would have beaten Trump
easily
had he become the Democratic nominee.
Definitely, yeah.
This time around, I don't know. I wouldn't put my money either way yet, but my confidence in my predictive abilities is like so shattered after 2016 that I don't know anything anymore.
I thought it was going to be Hillary and Jeb Bush, so I actually put money down on that.
Yeah, you lost $10 over that bet.
Yep.
Yeah,
I would have lost. I would have lost if I had put money on it.
Hey, well, we have like a fucking year and a half to continue to speculate, so we got plenty of time on our hands.
And be sad and generally just morose. I don't know.
Yeah. Wandering around in a daze, wondering what timeline you've wandered into.
Yeah, when Mac and I and a bunch of other friends were watching the results from the 2016 election come in live, and the moment when the news commentator was staring directly into the camera and saying, "Donald Trump is the new president of the United States," I actually felt like I was trapped in a fucking nightmare. Like, what the fuck? And it was a surreal experience, and I'm still stuck there to this day, as we all are.
Again,
yeah.
It was it was rough for me too, I guess, but the moment I realized it was when I showed up to this house party that we were all going to watch the feed coming in, and I showed up and I looked at the board of red and blue states and who's taking what, and I sort of just saw it, and it's that doesn't look right. This it was 6 p.m. or something, and I was just Donald Trump's gonna win. He's well on his way to winning, and this guy who is real keen on the Democratic Party and an NDPer here, he was but our people are losing, and I'm well, they're not really my people, but okay. But it was just an odd moment where I sort of went, yeah, that's what's happening. Donald Trump is going to be president. I mean, he's a total. Donald Trump's just such a wad to me. It
was definitely a surreal moment for me. I mean, I didn't really feel like I had a dog in the fight, so to speak.
Definitely
no fan of Hillary's, so I didn't really feel bad to see her humiliated.
Yeah, but, I mean, that's the one thing I'll be able to tell grandkids. Once the world has ended and we're sleeping in a ditch in some post-apocalyptic world somewhere, I'll tell them how, at least I got to see the people in power humbled for a day.
Yeah.
That is nice. And I do think that that's a big part of why a lot of people voted for Trump and may even vote for him again. But at the same time, it's that's really nihilistic.
Oh, absolutely.
It just isn't that's not enough. Just to be I want to see these people sad. I want to see Hillary Clinton too depressed in her hotel room to even give a concession speech, which I also remember happening because she wouldn't give one for
till the next day.
Yeah, and I was just, and there were people at that meeting. There were people at that party we were at who were just oh, she's I don't know, didn't believe it would happen, and I was yeah, maybe, or just she's just asleep. I don't know. It's just there's just a point where it's your politics have to be more than just wanting to see someone else suffer.
Yeah.
And yes, I enjoyed it. It's kind of shameful to say this, but I did enjoy the fact that Hillary Clinton lost.
That was the only good thing about Trump winning.
But that's not politics. That's just pettiness.
That's just being a shit.
It's true. But it seems I don't know, and maybe, I don't know, it's just spitballing. Maybe it's because partly the barrage of social media and that being plugged into so many issues all the time, people kind of just revert to the most basic and most simple drivers of emotion and petty vindictiveness or tribalism of some kind, but it's not ideal.
Well, that's that's the path of least resistance, right?
It is, absolutely.
And of course that's why it's so common these days, but I think that is the primary reason why liberal centrist politics does not have a future in the post-2008 economic landscape that we have, on which politics is based, where if all we're going to do is express outrage or say such and such, you have to give a better. You have to put, and this harkens back to what we were saying before, is deplatforming is not good enough. You have to present better ideas. You have to present a better world that people can live in. It's not good enough to say, oh, haha, Hillary lost, isn't that great, because she sucked.
Trump is wearing a toupee, ha ha ha, he can't do Twitter right, ha ha.
Yeah, hamburgers and kofifi and whatever. This is bullshit. I mean, actual politics should be getting actual people involved in actual issues on the ground to fight for a better world that is possible if enough people cooperate together, and that is what I think myself socialism is and could be.
Well said.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree. I do think that's to me. I mean, again, I don't want to slag off too many people on the right wing unnecessarily, but I do think that that's fundamentally the difference between our idea of left-wing politics and a lot of the right-wing politics that we've seen. That it's we're optimists on the left. We think that things can be better. This isn't like the world is dying and history is ended and Trump is going to kill us all. It's just no, we can do better. There are better things that can happen. The world can be made better. How we do that is incredibly complicated and will require a lot of other work and debates and arguments and bullshit. But yeah, a better world is possible. That's the left-wing mantra. Yeah. It's just a better world is possible. We can do better. Whether that's child infant mortality rates, access to health care, cost of rent, we can do better. That's the whole point. That's the only thing that has ever interested me in the left, ever. It's just, we can do better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's, I think that's a refreshing thing to hear too, that you don't hear a lot of anywhere online. I mean, I find maybe it's my own echo chamber I've gotten sucked into, but to me, there's just so much doom and gloom and fatalism out there that I think that's important to talk about. The real goal here for everyone should be to make things better.
It's funny that you say that, and I will just briefly state that my actual entry into politics was, in fact, with conspiracy theory and with Alex Jones and InfoWars.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, way, in fact.
Way.
Because
do tell.
I will try to keep this brief, because, this was a long time ago, high school time, but I saw Alex Jones ranting passionately about how there's something profoundly wrong with the world and there's a evil cabal of powerful people controlling everything and pulling the strings and manipulating everything in their own image. And that was, that kind of made sense. And the world is completely fucked up. And there is a small cabal of powerful people pulling the strings. And so, I went down the path of being concerned about the black helicopters and the chemtrails and so on and so on. But what eventually kind of turned me off of it was that the InfoWars folk weren't really providing solutions. It was all just fear-mongering and scary, and, the New World Order is upon us, and, they're going to implement martial law any day now.
Camps.
Yeah, and I kind of got fatigued, where it's
they have all the power, and they're evil, and they're going to, drop the hammer on you any day now.
Yeah, and I wanted something that was, better than that. Well, give me a fucking solution. What do I do? What do we do to make the world better? How do we, other than stockpiling fucking munitions and non-perishable foods?
Pickling things.
Yeah, survivalist shit. What do I actually do? And so eventually I got turned on to socialist left-wing politics. It's hey, actually we can organize collectively together to make a better world, and it's not easy, and this is probably, establishing, socialism is probably going to be the most difficult thing the most difficult project that humanity has ever attempted, but it's worth it. And if there's actually something that we can do to improve the state of humanity and avoid literally fucking boiling alive due to the climate catastrophe, then we ought to try it. And so it was really the lack of like solutions and alternatives in the conspiracy theory world that turned me on to left-wing politics.
That's interesting. I don't know if I've heard anyone have that exact trajectory out of the kind of like conspiracy world before, but it's encouraging to hear any story of someone who kind of like, finds other ways. But it's funny you mention it. I mean, Freethinkradio, when it started out like 10 years ago, it's basically like a platform of a website, but it ended up with a heavy Alex Jones influenced crew of hosts.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yeah. And we actually, like my boyfriend and I have owned and run the site, and we just shut it down at a point because it got too much. Not only was it toxic in that it was fatalistic, like you were saying, and only focused on the worst possible outcomes and no solutions, but there's a lot of baggage that comes with stuff like that we just wanted no part of. So, I mean, I kind of have, I have some sympathies, I guess you would say, with that topic and that community. I mean, like, there's legitimate conspiracies that happen and they deserve attention and can talk about them freely. I don't think they should ever be censored, even the ones that are outlandish. But there's definitely a line to be drawn.
Well, I think that it's important to acknowledge that in every conspiracy theory there is a kernel of truth to it, right? There's always something that, like, like obvious example, Illuminati. Sure. Yeah, there is a small group of very exceedingly wealthy individuals that meet in fucking Davos on their private jets every single year. But, the more sort of extreme conspiracy theorists will sort of take that and run with it and get all sorts of crazy theories and other stuff about that. But in reality, it's that, well, actually, we just live under a capitalist system where private capital is accumulated in, like, those who own it. And
my other sympathy, I guess, sometimes is that it can go a little bit in the opposite direction. Like the guest I just had on last week, another guy in Ontario here, we ended up getting on to Alex Jones a bit and talking about the gay frogs meme.
They're turning the frogs gay.
Alex's famous gay. They're turning the frogs gay.
Everyone loves that one. It is silly.
But and that's become a joke. But the problem is, unfortunately, underneath that joke is the reality that our water table has become increasingly polluted with pharmaceutical chemicals that actually do adversely affect marine life.
That's always been, and I mean, that's always been the problem with Alex Jones and a lot of conspiracy theorists, because when he said, they're turning the frogs gay, they're not, but who cares? If you said they're dumping chemicals into our, drinking water and they're, screwing up frog biology, I mean, he could have said that.
Yeah.
Right? But he didn't. He said something else, and he said something else that's kind of like inflammatory and a bit silly for his audience. And I think that's where sort of I like cash out on the conspiracy theorist world, because it, I watched that with you, Ben, a couple of times. The documentary where they like go to the Owls, with Alex Jones heads to the...
Oh, that fraternity.
Yeah, the fraternity thing. Like the fraternity. Yeah. Okay, so it's like Alex Jones goes to a secret society, fraternity club, bullshit retreat, and is just like enamored with the symbolism of it. You know, he is fascinated with, like, the destruction of innocence and blah, 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 blah. For me, watching that, what interested me most was that it's like, these are the most powerful people on Earth, and they're hanging out together, talking about, like, what they're going to do in the next year. That's what's actually important. The symbolism is completely irrelevant. It's the fact that it's George, H.W. Bush, and a bunch of other people who have money and power. And it's that money and power that really, like, fuels the basis of the conspiracy. Because ultimately, I mean, I don't want to sort of name drop or anything, but, like, I actually really do agree with, like, Robert Anton Wilson's understanding of what conspiracies are. And he wrote a lot about he wrote the Illuminatus trilogy, and, has been interviewed a bunch of times on these questions. And basically, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but basically it's like thousands of conspiracies exist. Conspiracies exist all over the place. Some of them may even be true. 9/11 conspiracy theorists might be right? Like George Bush Jr. and Dick Cheney might have gotten together in a room somewhere someday and decided amongst themselves to, like, pay a bunch of people to blow up the World Trade Center buildings. But in the real world, what matters is that, like, the plans existed for decades even earlier to invade Iraq, invade Afghanistan, and that America, being a powerful country with bombs and armies and the ability to exert its force pretty much anywhere in the world, could just do so for whatever reason. Like, a conspiracy only matters because there is some other thing behind it that is the real muscle there.
By the way, just a quick shout out for any of you listening to this episode. There's a fantastic book by the author John Ronson called Them. And he does have a chapter where he visits the Bilderberg group meeting with Alex Jones together, and hilarity ensues.
But that's pretty much how I think about conspiracies. This is like, you know what? The three of us, we could start a conspiracy. Do you want to start a conspiracy? Do you want to, like, conspire together to do a thing that we three of us think are important? We could do it, right? We could conspire, the three of us, to overthrow a government. And then what? What do we do now? Like, we want to do that. We want to overthrow government A. Okay, well, I don't have much money in my bank account, and Ben doesn't have much, and I don't know about you, but I assume it's not enough to overthrow a government.
Don't count on it.
Yeah, fair enough. So suddenly our conspiracy loses a lot of steam because we don't have money behind it. But if you're like, I want to overthrow the Venezuelan government, suddenly there's people who'll be like, well, we have a few $1 million. We'll throw in for that. We'll help you out. That's, I think, the way conspiracies actually happen. It's not just a bunch of evil people in a room somewhere. It's just another way of expressing, like, the interests of different states or parties fighting amongst themselves. And yeah, sometimes it's secretive, but sometimes it's not. And at the end of the day, I don't think it actually really makes much of a difference either way. The conspiracies are just sort of like a tool. And the tool sometimes doesn't... Yeah, the tool doesn't have any power behind it, and so it doesn't work.
That's a refreshingly practical take, actually, I think, on the whole topic of conspiracy. But I've kept you guys for almost 2 hours now. I don't know how you guys are doing for time, but
we can wrap up here pretty quick, or we can go as long as you want.
No,
it doesn't matter.
I
feel I pity you for having to edit this. Is all.
Oh, no, not at all. Not to worry. It's been great. It's been a great conversation as far as I'm concerned. So
we got time. I mean, I think we're just gonna because I know there's a couple of questions here that we haven't really gotten to, so I would like to.
Okay, awesome. Excellent. Well, let's do it then. All right. So, I wanted to talk to each of you guys a little bit about, like your own kind of backgrounds and experiences and, what motivates you politically and stuff like that. So, of course, I was, I guess, like stalking you guys a little bit online, just reading your bios and whatnot. And Ben, you mentioned in yours that you've done a lot of traveling in South America, and that has been like a real interest of yours.
Well,
I was just wondering if you had any, like stories or.
So I'm sorry, but he took this particular opportunity to just go to the bathroom.
Oh.
Unless he's coming
timing.
out of
Oh, it's okay. Sorry.
Oh, he's here. Oh, never mind. I was blathering on about nothing. Anyway, Ben, you went to South America. Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah. So as I was stalking you online in preparation for our chat,
Right.
I was reading your bio on the Out of Left Field website, which people can check out at outofleftfield.ca, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And you mentioned that you've traveled in South America a fair bit, and that South American politics has been a real interest of yours. So I was wondering, like if you wanted to talk a bit about that, like what brought you there, and if there's anything noteworthy or anything that particularly stands out.
Yeah, I mean, I've I can't really explain why, but I've had kind of always an intense interest in Latin American politics. I feel that Canada, the United States, Mexico, South America, like the whole Western Hemisphere has something of a shared history of colonialism and displacement of the, First Nations people, and like we all kind of have a common thread in that, and that has always kind of fascinated me in terms of the fact that not only did America have a history of slavery, but Brazil and plenty of other countries in the Western Hemisphere have the same kind of history, and I think it's very interesting how it all kinds of has you can draw the same, no matter what kind of thread you're pulling, it all comes back to the same sweater, I guess. I went to Bolivia and Peru backpacking like shortly after I graduated from high school. I slept in a laundry room and worked in a kitchen for like 8 months to save up money for it. And I chose Bolivia because there was the water war going on there, where the very right-wing reactionary government was trying to privatize the water industry and sell it off to Bechtel, which is, I think, a Californian private water company. And they were actually even trying to privatize and charge people for collecting rainwater in buckets in their backyards. And they organized this very impressive kind of resistance to it. And this culminated in the election of Evo Morales, who I think to this day is the president of Bolivia. And I was like, hey, fucking shit's going on. Stuff's happening. That sounds really cool. Why not go there? Unfortunately, I missed Evo Morales' inauguration party by 1 day. I got there the day after the inauguration celebrations. He is the first indigenous president of Bolivia, in a country where more than 2/3 of the population are First Nations. But what I did get to see was Hugo Chavez visiting Evo Morales for the first state meeting they had was there, and there was like thousands of people waiting just to see him, which I got to see, which was cool. And I did get to see Evo Morales give a speech on International Children's Day at this like fun park somewhere, which was cool. But it was great. I very much have a passion for Latin American politics. I follow it pretty closely to this day. We've done a couple episodes on the whole Venezuelan situation with a comrade of ours in Venezuela, and I just think it's a fascinating kind of I guess I don't even want to say microcosm because it's an entire hemisphere.
It's way bigger than our country.
Yeah. But it's a very volatile and radical kind of politics where you really get to see like the nitty gritty of how in actual reality in the colonial backdoor of the United States, how politics actually plays out. And I think it's a very unbridled, raw, ruthless kind of politics that is, very different than what we have in Canada. And so I've always just been very fascinated with it, and I think it's very cool. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that's amazing that you've gotten to travel like that and have those experiences. And I guess I can see what you're saying too. Like, it doesn't really get talked about much, but it does. South American politics have kind of had a funny mirror quality, I guess, to North American, and especially right now, it seems like Brazil has kind of got their own Trump style leader at the helm.
He's more Trump than Trump is.
Yeah, that's from what I've heard. I don't follow it near as close as you probably have, but you must have found that kind of alarming or interesting too, to see that influence from the U.S. kind of carry on into South America.
Well, I mean, the last thing I'll say about it is I think that the Latin America has always kind of been what the United States has regarded to be as their backyard. And as they have kind of gone on their failed imperialist conquests from Afghanistan to Iraq to, dare I say, Vietnam, that they're kind of, regressing back to trying to police Latin America, and they can't even really seem to orchestrate a coup d'etat in, quote-unquote socialist Venezuela. So I think it's an interesting kind of area to keep watch over the world over the next while to see how things pan out.
Definitely it will be. And there's kind of a question, similar world politics that maybe I'll come back to, but Mac, I also online stalked you in preparation for this.
Cool.
And as I read on the website, you are involved in the trades. And generally, correct me if I have this wrong, but the stereotype seems to be that blue-collar workers, people involved in trades of all kind, are, in fact, the right-wing voting bloc and are the majority of right-wing supporters. So, as someone who is a self-avowed socialist, I definitely wanted to ask you what you thought about that cliche or that stereotype, if it's true in your experience, and if not, why the reputation?
Look, don't get me wrong. I would say in the trades, especially if we're talking about like the sort of more modern liberal ideas of like inclusiveness, the trades are garbage. They're the worst. Everyone is sexist. Well, not everyone. No, how should I put it? It doesn't matter. People just sort of blurt out offensive things all the time. It's kind of part of the culture.
Yeah.
That is true. Like people are blurting out racist and sexist things just like every time they hammer a nail into a piece of wood. That happens. But realistically, I don't think that actually translates to any kind of political values, because
no, I don't think so either. And I mean, I've been, I've worked in blue collar jobs. I've been in like academic settings. So I've kind of seen both worlds, and I totally agree. It does not translate to politics, kind of the day-to-day banter.
Yeah, and not for nothing, but like the banter, I like. People shouldn't be assholes, is my general view of things. Like, you don't have to be a complete piece of shit to work a job. So why are you doing that? But to be fair, I know some right-wingers, like actual right-wingers I've worked with, who will, like, when everyone's just eating lunch, just blather on about, like, their weird right-wing politics. And, not for nothing, but, like, people just pretend to agree with them until they leave. Like, that is the most common attitude I have ever seen. Is just like, yep, okay,
yep,
cool. Yeah, so-and-so shouldn't be in this country. Yeah, okay.
Sure thing.
I'm just...
Whatever you say.
Can I eat my sandwich? Neat. Okay, I'm gonna go do something. Yeah, and I think a lot of right-wingers probably imagine themselves being the, like, you know, lords of their, you know, their job site because everybody listens to them, but the reality is that nobody likes that shit. It just... Right-wing politics are really unpleasant, and again, kind of coming back to the left-wing stuff, like when I say, you know, the minimum wage should be raised, I have never, ever in my experience heard anyone be like, well, no, but the boss works really hard. It's always like, yeah, my wages are shit and they should be higher. Everyone I've worked with has said that. Every single one of them. And I think that that's the real, like, foundation of left-wing politics, is that people work, people do a job. It may not be, like, glamorous or interesting. It may just be, like, you know, working at a gas station or working at a grocery store or working at fucking anything. But that's all that, that is how the actual economy functions, through people's work. It's not through Jeff Bezos, like, deigning to, like, I don't know, dip his precious royal finger into a pool of water, and that, like, makes shit happen. It's people working. That's all there is. It's just people working. That's the whole economy. And to be honest, I think left-wing arguments, I mean, the average person may, you know, in a work site might be way more right-wing than me. They almost certainly will be. But if I say, wouldn't you like $1 more for your per hour? I have yet to hear someone who says no.
Hear, hear.
I have yet to hear anyone who says, you know, is your wage shit? And they go, actually, I love it. It's great. It's the best. I love being paid a crappy wage for the work I do. Everybody wants to be paid more. And the question then for anyone who's like an individualist is like, well, why isn't that happening? And the simple answer, and this is when the opportunity arises for me at least, is like, you know, we need to be organized. We work. We make the shit happen. Wheels turn because we make them turn. Is that not enough? Like, why not demand more? And as far as I'm concerned, the demand for more in the average workshop, work site, whatever, is exactly the same as that idea we were talking about earlier about, like, building a better world, you know, optimism. There is something more. There is something better. And that's something I can tell anyone I work with is like, your wages could be higher. And that's actually pretty cool. Like, people like the idea that they could make more money.
Or that they could have free pharmaceuticals, or, you know, better health care.
Or that they don't have to pay for their steel-toed shoes. Just anything.
Or that their kids could have a class size of less than 38 students.
Yeah, and I think, like, it's fair to say that, you know, if you go to the average job site, yeah, it's going to be a bunch of, like, whistling douchebags, you know, being sexist assholes. That's true, but, like, the actual politics of it, and this is where I think the class basis really does cut across so many things, is like, once you say, we together can fight for things, then suddenly the sexism really looks like a detriment. Because I can say to somebody, you know, you were whistling at that woman yesterday, or you were just being a shithead yesterday. But what if there's someone on our job site who's a woman? Like, you're alienating her from the common cause we have. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And that undermines our strength. And that, I think, is the real way to like, cut across, you know, sexism and bigotry, is by being able to say, we all work, we all have a common cause, anyone can be doing this job, sure, but we're the ones doing it. And that is what brings us together. And I think that's, for me at least, like I understand the idea that, like, you know, most Marxists have a PhD and all that kind of crap, but, like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see my politics as in any way contradictory to my, like, situation economically. You know, work for a living?
Right.
Well, of course I'm a left-winger.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't I be? Because, you know, wages go up when unions are strong. And unions are strong when, you know, men, women, gays, lesbians, heterosexuals are united. That's what makes strong unions. That's what makes a strong middle class. That's all that has ever made a strong middle class, is unions. Nothing else does it. So what the hell else am I gonna, you know, look to?
Yeah, I find there's a frustrating dynamic I find that happens, it's kind of similar to what you were describing, where people seem to look at things as like a zero-sum game, you know, like talking about unions fighting for better wages or better benefits, or public sector workers looking for the same. Yeah. And you have private sector workers who are saying, well, I don't have those things, so why should you? As if, you know, you can't all have better things. Or you shouldn't all expect, you know, a better standard for yourselves.
Well, yeah, well, exactly. And it really upsets me when I hear people say, like, oh, fast food workers, what, they deserve $15 an hour just for flipping burgers? I'm doing my job that's way harder than flipping burgers, and I don't want them to make more than me. And that's just an abject lack of class consciousness. The fact of the matter is that nobody working full-time should be poor. Period. Nobody should have to work multiple jobs.
You're working 40 hours a week? Whatever that number is that makes it so, you shouldn't be able to be poor.
Yeah, I mean, the whole concept of a minimum wage is that you can not be poor on it if you're working 40 hours a week full time. That was the whole idea of a minimum wage. And as neoliberalism and the crisis eroding of the crisis of capitalism has gone on, is that idea has been eroded more and more and more. And I think that I think that it is of utter importance that working class people unite together and in common cause say that no, if you work 40 hours a week, you shouldn't be poor. We need a living wage. We need at the bare minimum $15 an hour for everybody, and that we should all fight for our own interests together.
Excellent. All right. Well. Oh, sorry, Matt, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that, like, I do think it's the only thing that actually can, respond to the powers that be. It's the only power we have is, like, organizing together. And I think there are plenty of people who don't want to be part of a group and all that kind of stuff. But, like, we win or we lose based on how much we stick together as far as, working goes. That's it. There isn't really an option to, like, I'm just going to be my own person and to demand my own things. Like, you go to your manager and demand a better wage, and he either just laughs at you or fires you. That's it.
Yeah. Was there any last points you wanted to touch on?
Yeah, actually, there's one final question I had in mind before I give you guys the chance to, just mention anything you have coming up and plug the podcast and all that kind of thing. It wasn't in the list that I initially sent you, but it's kind of developed since we first got in touch, and I thought getting your opinion on it would be really interesting. So, as socialists, Marxists, there's a rising, I think everyone would agree, issue and tension between China and Canada specifically, but the West more generally. And China being the kind of, Russia, whatever, people still think of it as like the Soviet Union, Cold War commies, but really China now is the global representative of communism. And I think we could probably all agree that the CCP are awful, to put it mildly, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So how how do you guys how would you respond to someone who says to you, why would you be a socialist or a Marxist when you look at a country like China with a Marxist government running the show, and it's like just an absolute dystopian nightmare?
The first answer, of course, is like, yeah, China is a dystopian nightmare. The second answer is that, like, again, the unions in China have actually been fighting against that, Chinese Communist Party. The working class of China is not really unified behind it. Additionally, and it's kind of interesting because I've not heard too much from it, but I want to know more, is that there have been these Marxist student groups in China who have been coming into conflict with the central government. And
yeah,
they're like,
I heard a bit about that too.
Yeah, but it's interesting because it's like, well, we actually think Marxism is a good idea, and we're reading about it, and the Chinese central government is like, yeah, come on, we abandoned that several decades ago, and now we're just about power and authority.
Yeah. They're like, no, it's us now, guys.
Yeah, it's
us.
We just obey, don't read. And to be fair, the Chinese Communist Party is not Marxist. They're just in power. They're just,
right.
And they may lean on it. They may say the revolution or whatever. But I think that an analysis of class relations does ultimately require just us to look at what things actually are. The Chinese Communist Party doesn't actually care about the working class of China. They're interested in staying in power, period. Whatever that means, whatever that requires. Whether that means banning unions, banning whatever, it doesn't really matter. And that, to me, is sort of the dividing point, where it's China, yes, China exists, and they say they're communist, whatever that means, but it doesn't matter. The actual material politics is always what I care about, not the names anyone gives to their party.
I would say, as a very short answer to that, there can be no democracy without socialism, nor socialism without democracy. And China has neither.
Right.
So dot. I don't know.
Yeah. But it is, I thought it would be interesting to get your take on that, because I imagined it must be discouraging in some ways to have that argument available to people who, would try to argue against socialist principles, to have that monstrosity.
I don't know.
It's nothing new. 30 years ago, the same would have been said about the Soviet Union. And
right.
And I would have had a lot of criticisms about them if I had been asked then,
Yeah, if I had been alive then,
if I had a podcast in 1968,
yeah, I would have said the same thing. No democracy, no socialism, no democracy. I think that the usage of the word communism is I'm basically just a fig leaf.
Doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. Any more than America is saying, they're invading Iraq to install democracy.
Yeah.
It doesn't, democracy is a good thing. But that doesn't mean I'm just sort of mindlessly going wherever the actual word goes. They said they were going to be democratic, and so that's why the war is happening. So I have to just obey the logic of the dictionary definition. But
right.
And just to, briefly kind of explain what I mean by there can be no democracy without socialism, nor socialism without democracy. What I mean by that is that, in countries like Canada and the United States and Europe, where we proclaim to have, functional, flourishing democracies, every single day people go to their workplace that is a tyranny. It's a dictatorship. Your boss tells you what to do and you do it, otherwise you get fired. And
if you get fired, you lose your apartment.
And so on and so on.
Yeah.
True democracy, if we're talking on a systemic level, is extending the democratic rights and freedoms that we have in the, sort of formal political sphere into the actual day in, day out realities that working class people feel and experience on a day-to-day basis at the workplace. If true socialism is extending democratic decision-making and planning to our everyday lives, 40 hours a week, what we do for a living. And if we can actually make that happen, that would be socialism, not anything that, communist China or the USSR or the DPRK or whatever happens to claim that it is.
Right. Excellent. Well, I think that's a really good note to leave it on, guys.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. 2 hours isn't long enough.
No, we didn't even get to everything. And I was going to ask you your opinion on bike lanes in Victoria, but we didn't get to that either.
Oh, dear God.
Don't even get me started. Fuck automobiles, fuck cars, burn them all.
Bike lanes are fine. I hate anyone who has an opinion on bike lanes.
Well, I guess we'll have to save that for another episode in the future then, eh?
Yeah, for sure. I haven't been to Victoria in a couple years now. I miss it. Even just talking to you guys makes me miss the island. But yeah, thank you so much. This has been really, really enjoyable, guys. I'm really glad we did it.
Yeah, ditto. This was a lot of fun.
It was really nice.
I loved being on the other side of the interviewer, chessboard or whatever. It was great.
I can be as much of a fucking just time balloon as possible. It doesn't matter.
Well, that's excellent. I was very glad for it. So yeah, before I let you go though, what's coming up for Out of Left Field podcast this summer? And also, you do have a third co-host who maybe we'll give a shout out to.
Yes.
Who couldn't be here today.
Anthony, the third co-host, was not able to make it. But honest, full disclosure, we kind of just play things by ear with the podcast. But we do have Laurel Collins coming on the show, NDP nominee for Victoria that is going to be running in the upcoming federal election. She's going to be on the show next.
And we plan to have Lee on again for his new book.
Oh yeah, his new book. People's Republic of Walmart, and we are going to have a bunch of other great episodes that we haven't even had the forethought to think of yet.
Awesome. That sounds good. Cool. And people can find you on SoundCloud.
Yes.
And do you upload the episodes to the website as well?
Slowly but surely, yes. Normally, SoundCloud is the best place to find us. Also, our Twitter handle is @RealUlf, and we have a Facebook page. And if you ever want to get in touch with us or send us hate mail, then just tweet at us or
please
find
send
us
us
on
hate
Facebook.
Mail.
And thanks very much for having us on your show. This was a great conversation.
Oh, my pleasure, guys. Thank you. All right. Well, everyone should check out the Out of Left Field podcast, and thank you, everyone, for hanging out at the kitchen table tonight. We'll catch you next time.
All right. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.